How would you feel about a law that requires people to take courses on parenting and education before getting children? You know how when you were in school, the only kids who showed up to study hall were the ones that didn't need the help? Think it might be one of those cases, dude. Edit. Look, you idiots, people don't just automatically follow the law. Stealing coffee from my campus is larceny, but no one saw me do it. So there. I agree, it won't solve anything because the people who need teaching this stuff aren't gonna come because they don't care. The reason why the ones who don't need help come is because they care enough to make sure they're doing it right. The ones who need it won't care enough about their kids to show up. Offer a tax rebate, or cheaper child care, sort of like taking a defensive driving course. Those words and politicians go like the devil and holy water. At best you get a lot of steam and hot air. I think the whole thing isn't going to work, to be honest. I feel like it could easily be taken advantage of and make people raise their kids a certain way, whether it be politically biased or socially biased. It just doesn't seem like it would be a good idea. Because the people who actually need this class aren't going to go. Some people will be too busy to go. And the people that actually do go probably aren't the ones who need it and are probably going to be easily manipulated to raise their kid in a weird way. If you are worried about your kid's well-being, love your child, can financially provide for a family, and want to make that next step in your life, I say do it. But not right now. You don't want your kid to be born as a coronile. Wait until the pandemic is over. How would you enforce those laws? What happens to people who get pregnant despite not passing the parenting test? Would this law disproportionately affect women because it would be harder to detect fathers breaking it? Seems like it has a lot of problems and ultimately wouldn't really do any good if it was enforced in any way. And most importantly, who is going to be deciding what they're teaching in those classes? Anyone that took a health class at a public high school in Alabama ought to be able to tell you that it shouldn't be the local or state government. So we're down to the federal government, who just let a pandemic run rampant because they didn't believe viruses spread. It ain't that big a jump to assume an anti-vaxxer might get elected president someday. Do we want them deciding what gets taught as the official guide to being good parents? Ahem. Does he think the government is trying to give children autism? He is the government. Tha fuck. This question seems to be very controversial. Here are some additions derived from some good comments. The law should maybe be more like a widely advertised program. Participation should always be mandatory. But you could encourage people with an additional monthly government welfare plan, like $150 for 5 years, and or with tax cuts if they participate. Also, companies should be obliged to let people leave work for classes and be repaid double by the government. I just feel like many parents never learned anything about how to bring a completely new individual into the world and help him integrate into society. From what I have heard from women, it seems like getting a child is a spiritual experience they could use guidance with. Also, the course and test should be made and carried out by scientists of many fields. Yes, let's give government more reason to get involved in your personal life. Basically what I was gonna state. What? Would the government do forced abortions to those who fail to comply? Or mandatory abstinence and or birth control for prevention? Yes, that works so well in high school. Let's face it, if you look away from two people for more than an hour, there's a non-zero chance they're gonna do it. The vast majority of bad parenting comes from economic hardship and cultural conditioning. The idea that there's just this huge corpus of terrible parents whose children run wild because they've just chosen not to care is patently absurd. Literally never heard an argument from this that doesn't begin and end in either fascism or racism. I was gonna do meth and then beat my kids, but then I remembered the 4-hour parenting course I had to take and realized that was a bad idea. There are few people in the middle ground who might benefit from some small bit of teaching, but the vast majority, as evidenced by the billions of adults living today, will do okay. The truly shitty parents who abuse and neglect aren't going to be changed by a couple of night classes. And the great parents didn't learn those skills in a couple of lectures developed to the minimum standard, they got it from a lifetime of their own education and experiences. Like in theory, oppose in actuality. First, I'm not sure requiring the course will do much to educate people. Already educated parents have the resources to seek much of this information out. Others may not take it seriously, and due to work schedules and other factors would have difficulty attending. Some people may have unplanned pregnancies or not know they're pregnant. How would you enforce the requirement in that case? Taking children seems too drastic and may stress an ineffective foster system. Fines may punish but only offer a way for some to buy out of the option. I don't see an equitable way to require it. There's also the difficulty of curriculum. What kinds of parenting and educational practices are taught? You'd need strict quality control to ensure that elements of religious education or spare the rod/spoil the child don't work their way into the classroom. Also, I don't expect a single class shortly before birth will help parents who only run into issues at specific developmental stages. To me, a better idea would be offering free classes tied to a healthcare package for first-time parents. Just as classes already focus on birth and post-birth child care, offer additional classes on education tied to yearly pediatrician appointments. If you make sure everyone has access to healthcare, they'll also have access to these classes. I agree with all of this. I think it'd be more effective to add to high school health curriculum. I had to take 2 health classes in high school. Perhaps schools could focus one of those on parenting skills, in addition to proper sexual health instruction to help prevent pregnancy. Teens should be taught about the resources available, Planned Parenthood, Plan B at the pharmacy, where they can get birth control, etc. Teaching correct behavior won't be effective if they don't have the resources to practice it. I'm a young teacher at the front lines of bad parents. I've seen teachers call CPS 6 times this year alone for the same child. The thing is, most of these people aren't educated, are living in poverty, and are a part of a vicious cycle. I'm not saying wealthy, educated people can't suck as parents, they definitely can, but usually wealthy children at least have their basic needs met, unless there is some severe manipulation. It's not that the parents don't love their kids, they just can't even take care of themselves, much less a child. Another problem I see is that parents don't understand the resources available, so they don't take advantage of them. If we really want the government to be more involved, they need to put more money into social work. Social workers need higher pay, there need to be more of them with smaller caseloads, and there needs to be a focus on giving parents counseling and resources so they can be good parents. I think it'd also be helpful for there to be a social worker, or more, assigned to every school, then they can begin investigations immediately and have a better understanding of the community they're dealing with. What's to keep the curriculum from being based on the terrible pop science of the day? In the early 1900s, parents were advised by psychologists, scientists and experts to hold their babies as little as possible. This trend was practiced commonly as late as the 1960s. If this program were instituted during that time, not holding your baby would likely be taught. In the 90s, helicopter parenting and participation trophies would likely have been the curriculum of choice. There are probably just as many bad theories about parenting around today. It will just take us a few years to realize exactly how they screwed up our kids. Instituting these courses on a mass scale will only ensure that these theories are propagated throughout the entire society, not just portions of it. It depends on the content. Who is deciding what constitutes good parenting and what isn't? I have been given advice from child health nurses that was outdated and rubbish. If that was the only education I received, I would not be doing right by my kids. I am all for education, but to not allow a person to keep their baby if they do not pass it is going a bit beyond this. When I had my son, I was more educated than the pediatric nurses at the hospital. They were convinced he absolutely needed to be circumcised and used all the outdated reasons. I literally got in a heated argument with one just an hour after giving birth. If I didn't have say from the very beginning of how I wanted to raise and care for my child, he would have been butchered. It's nobody's say but mine. I'm his mother. That said, I grew up with a lot of extreme abuse that could have been avoided if any adults around me had half a brain cell. We need more awareness and education for people who work with children. Hell, I would get abused so bad that I went to school and got sent home for essentially bleeding too much. They make us take courses for responsible borrowing and how much interest you pay on student loans before and after we borrow, and look how that turns out. I'll be done with student loans in about 4 years, but I could have been done a couple years ago if I paid attention to those courses.